So I'm here to speak to the budget, as you know, and in particular to the motion as it stands that's before council regarding the direction for the budget. I feel that motion is, to be blunt, wrong-headed in its entirety. The 5% guideline is plainly too low for the needs of this city, and at this point, it is, in my opinion, mandatory for council to provide some priorities or direction if anything resembling 5% is to be achieved. For the moment, let's assume that 5% does go ahead. That means that we are looking for $8 million of cuts from the status quo estimates that were provided. That is deep cuts, very deep cuts. And as we learned from the presentations in June, the bulk of those cuts, the bulk of opportunities for cuts are in community and social services. If we look at the study about that was spoken about last week that divides the budget into mandatory essential categories, we'd be looking at about all of the discretionary funding and a very rough estimate, about a quarter of the traditional programs being eliminated in their entirety to achieve $8 million. In short, this is a plan that will hurt people. The burden of cuts, and apart from those borne by city employees who will lose their jobs, will be on the most vulnerable in our community. Council can, of course, set any guideline it wishes, but this decision will be a tough decision that requires very clear and strong leadership. Councillor Burke raised the possibility of setting priorities at this point in the meeting last week, and I was very disappointed when it was not entertained. This is a new budget process. It is not August. It is now June. It is now August. We are much later in the process and much more informed than council has been historically when setting a priority or when setting a guideline. It would simply be poor governance at this point to come up with a number and throw it over the fence. This is not speaking to lack of faith in the skill or the wisdom of city employees, but a call for accountability and courage from the people the city of Peterborough elected. To be clear, there's no need to overspecify. I'm not expecting anyone to write the whole budget in a meeting today, but there was a suggestion I made, I believe, by Councillor Beamer in June that council could set a guideline and identify a few priorities. And that's simply all I'm asking for. That could either be identifying areas where council feels it would be appropriate to make cuts, or priorities to maintain or keep investment as sort of guardrails for the process. We've heard last week ideas of infrastructure, housing, the downtown. One thing that I know has come up many times is that it's important to keep the Centennial Fountain operating. If those are priorities, name them and put them in a decision. If those aren't the priorities, the time to have that discussion is right now. At an absolute minimum, council could perhaps have staff report back on the high-level implications of a 5% budget guideline before the November budget meetings, but time for that is rapidly running out. If council can't reach an agreement on the strategy to achieve a 5% guideline, or is not willing to even entertain that conversation, then I would submit that the guideline itself is inappropriate. Pretty much pretty much all of the 5% is spoken for. Over half of it from decisions this council has already made. The capital financing policy's 1% is almost entirely already committed. There's 1.45% for the tax ratio issue we had from last year. It's 0.73% to annualize approved positions. I won't name number at you, but when I add it up, our existing council decisions add up to 4.38% tax increase. That's before considering inflation, contractual increases to compensation, or any enhancements to city services, including ones that we desperately need, such as for housing and homelessness. In addition, I have great anxiety about the capital budget. I have about a minute left, so I can't get into detail, but every year we see a larger and larger gap between the cost of maintaining the city's infrastructure and the money available to do so. This is a crisis, and it gets larger and closer every year. The 1% increase in capital finance policy is plainly inadequate, and I urge council to consider increasing it. I realize that at this point, we're fundamentally having an ideological question before us. And is a conversation I'm happy to have, but in the interest of time, I'll reiterate a point that I made at some point in the budget process last year. There are very real problems facing the city of Peterborough, and we know that it is the job of higher levels of government to help us solve them, and higher levels of government are absent. This does not absolve council from their responsibility to work towards solving them. Debating the role of the provincial government in funding city programs or expressing our anxieties about the results of the next upcoming election, federal election, does not house the homelessness. It does not keep the buses running, and it does not pave the city's roads. But budget decisions made in this chamber do. Thank you.